Mr Quilty.
Thank you, Acting President. I will be brief. The Liberal Democrats tend to cringe when we hear about a new government proposal to restructure government authorities. All the opportunities for increased bureaucracy, increased licensing and increased costs, combined with reduced efficiency, increased centralisation, generally a pouring of sand into the gears. Actions like abolishing the Victorian Ports Corporation for Melbourne and the Victorian Regional Channels Authority for everywhere that's not Melbourne to create a single body tends to come at a high price for the regional bodies involved in those mergers. While Melbourne is the largest port for containerised and general cargo, the Port of Geelong is Australia's 5th largest port by tonnage, and the Port of Portland is the largest sustainable hardwood wood chip port in the world. It's not just Melbourne that has an interest in our ports, although regional Victorians could be forgiven for not knowing this. For over 100 years, the Port of Melbourne has been prioritised over other Victorian ports, which have languished with failing infrastructure and closed down rail lines. And here I don't just single out Portland. A string of ports have been neglected and their rail links allowed to deteriorate or become closed altogether. This is just another example of the long list of what Melbourne governments do to regional Victoria. Having said that, and while the Liberal Democrats would prefer the government getting out of the way and leaving the running of our ports altogether to private business, it's not completely out of the question that the government should have a role in planning and infrastructure around international trade. The fact that the new authority is based in Geelong rather than Melbourne is a nice start, although the proposition that Geelong is regional is increasingly called into question. Perhaps if we had a government really committed to decentralisation, the authority would have been based in Portland instead. But half a bone is better than none. The bill increases licensing requirements. That's probably unfortunate. It has not been made clear that there is a real specific problem that needs addressing, just the government wanting to expand licensing into all areas of the economy. But again, I'm less concerned about the licensing of harbour masters than I am about licensing hairdressers. Clause 5 of the bill provides the Minister with specific directions power which can hinder or help Ports Victoria. The Minister will be allowed to expand or limit the functions of Port Victoria, and I quote, subject to considerations by the Minister as to what is in the public interest. I have become increasingly opposed to giving ministers discretionary powers, and frankly I don't trust this government to know what is in the public interest. Wrapping our regional ports in additional red tape can't make things better. We do not need more decision-making from the ivory towers, or indeed beige towers of the Melbourne bureaucracy. We need less. This bill will allow decisions to be made that are far removed from those with local knowledge and understanding of regional ports and the way they do business, and risks shutting down agile practice and emergent strategies that coalface. I note that if Ports Victoria was to suffer financial detriment due to the directions to perform, or not to perform a function, by the Minister's call, then Ports Victoria may be reimbursed by the state from the Consolidated Fund. And that sounds to me like endorsing incompetence to take from a taxpayer-supported fund to reimburse another government agency. At the heart of the changes seems to be an argument for safety. The government claims, after its own report and the transport and logistics nightmare that occurred in 2020, that harbour masters have to be better regulated. But it is unclear if that's true. However, we will support the bill today. There's a possibility that the new authority will properly plan for the new Western Port. It needs reserved transport corridors, truck interchanges and railway lines that will bypass the Melbourne sprawl. The chance exists to get it right. We would hope the government would focus less on its suburban rail loop and more on its freight lines. Regional railway lines, and by extension the ports that sit at the end of them, are something of an interest of mine, as I'm sure my staff could attest. Many a time I've made them look at old railway maps with me and talk about what could have been done with them and what could still be done with them, other than pulling them up to make rail trails. I would love to see Portland get some more love. Its railway lines upgraded, including the stranded and abandoned Mount Gambier line, and the terminal upgraded for mineral sands loading as well as wheat and wood chips. Perhaps that will get picked up under the new authority, although I won't hold my breath. And we have other ports that could be regional ports that could be used more if the infrastructure was up to scratch. We will support some of the amendments from the opposition, but certainly not all, because some strive to make this legislation worse and not better.